Imogen Holst was a woman whose life was all about music from the very day that she was born. She was a composer, which was rare in her time, and a conductor, even more rare. She was the daughter of a composer. She later on became an assistant to one. She wrote books about music. She was a music educator. She was a music administrator, and she was a dancer. Her musical life is a fascinating one. She was immersed in music and spent her life trying to make sure as many people as possible were similarly immersed in it. Her personal life was private. She often covered up her own feelings and thoughts with a kind of theatrical veneer, but she did keep diaries, especially during her time working for Benjamin Britten in the 1950s, and is much more revealing about her feelings, particularly towards Britain. I'm here in Imogen Holst's former house in Church Walk in Aldeburgh in Suffolk, and she moved in here in 1962 and remained here until her death in 1984. It was designed by H.C. Cadbury Brown, known as Jim Cadbury Brown, and is on the site of what had been intended to be an opera house in Aldeburgh. But once those plans were abandoned, Cadbury Brown designed a house for himself and also for Imogen Holst. Imogen Holst paid a peppercorn rent of wine and Aldeburgh Festival tickets to the Cadbury Browns. She was extremely happy in this house. It's modest and small, but it's very distinctive and unusual and suited her very well indeed. She was born on the 12th of April 1907 in Richmond in Surrey, the only child of the composer Gustav Holst and his wife Isabel. A few years later, Gustav Holst was to write one of his most famous pieces, the Planet Suite, which was inspired by his great interest in astrology, and Gustav would often create astrological charts for himself and also for Isabel. He was greatly interested in music from other countries, particularly India, and Imogen was to travel to that country herself a number of years later. Imogen later recalled, "I first got to know my father as someone who played tunes on the piano for me to dance to. By the time I was 4, he was teaching me to sing folk songs." Her schooling was all about music, though she had hoped it to be more about dance, and she wanted to go to a dance and drama college. However, she went to St Paul's School for Girls, where her father was director of music, and went through various encounters with piano, violin and French horn. She studied composition for a year after leaving school with Herbert Howells, and then went to the Royal College of Music, winning several prizes for composition and getting experience as a conductor. Alongside, she was very much enjoying being a folk dancer, joining the English Folk Dancing Society and travelling to the US and Canada with them in 1929. Then there was more travel, some teaching and attempts to work on her compositions. And then war broke out in 1939 and Imogen joined CEMA, the Council for the Encouragement of Music and the Arts, which involved her travelling all over the country, bringing musical activities to the most far-flung places. This eventually drove her to exhaustion. The organisation was very short-staffed and often there was no public transport, so she had to arrive in these various places by foot or by bicycle. She recuperated in Dartington in Devon, but while she was there, she managed to set up a music training course, which later became a music school, which later became Dartington College. She left Dartington to freelance, and she also went to India, where she learnt Indian dancing and also Indian notation and taught Western harmony in return. And then in the early 1950s, her life changed hugely again. She was helping Benjamin Britten orchestrate one of his choral pieces, Rejoice in the Lamb, for the 1952 Aldeburgh Festival, when he asked her to join him in planning the next festivals. In fact, he said, "Always supposing you would like to come in and help us, and in future on a really professional basis, will you count yourself as definitely engaged in the preparations and running of Aldeburgh Festival numbers 6, 7, 8, 9? Please say yes." She did and worked for Britain until 1964. They had met during the CEMA years where Britten and Pears gave a recital at Dartington in 1943. Imogen writing to Britten, "Your music seems to me the only reliable thing that is happening in a world where everything else goes wrong all the time."
Working for him was very exhausting, especially because of the speed with which he himself worked. It was quite incredible. When I used to tell people that he could do 30 pages of his full score in one day, they thought I was lying.
She assisted him not only in the festival, but in the preparation of his compositions. First of all, Gloriana, his coronation opera, which was premiered in 1953, and they became very close friends. For Imogen, it tipped over into infatuation, and she records some of her comments about Britten in her diaries, describing how she would fall to pieces when he paid her a compliment. This is from February 1953. Wednesday, February the 18th. Ben had an interrupted morning with builders coming to look at the flood damage and Peter going off to Scotland, and news that their London flat may not materialise after all. He said he needed a stiff drink before Eric came, so I had one too because I was desperate. And when I thanked him for the day, he leaned his hot from the bath cheek against mine and said, "Thank you a million times. You are a very wonderful help to me." Her own original compositions took something of a back seat during her time working for Britten, although she did continue to make arrangements and to promote her father's music. She also established the Purcell Singers, which made regular appearances at the Aldeburgh Festival. She started composing again once she'd moved into this house in 1962, and then 2 years later she handed over as Britten's assistant to Rosamund Strode. She spent the years after continuing to compose and to write books and further to promote her father's music. One of the first pieces that she composed after moving into this house was a solo cello piece called The Fall of the Leaf, which is in the theme and variation format. It later on became a great favourite of the cellist Stephen Isserlis. Imogen Holst died in 1984 and she's buried in Aldeburgh churchyard just behind the graves of Britten and Pears. Her former house is now used for creative retreats, so it's lent out to composers and other creative artists who want a bit of space and time to create their own projects. Imogen Holst's life and work have been getting much more attention recently. For years, her name tended to be associated only with her father and for the composer that she worked for so many years. A book, Imogen Holst, A Life in Music, came out about 10 years ago, and her works are increasingly being discovered, recorded, performed and published. While she is often associated with two male composers, her own story really is one of great independence and creative freedom. She took tremendous care to carve out space for her own work, often going freelance in order to do so. Ultimately, she was a restless spirit, dancing throughout her life from one creative project to another.